I'm Barbara Tyran, past president of the Board of Directors of the Women's Council on Energy and the Environment, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all to today's virtual executive exchange. I am thrilled that we have the leadership from the National Association of State Energy Offices here with us today to discuss supporting state energy policies and programs. With that brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to them for self-introductions, as well as an overview of NASEO and its work. And then we will open it up to Q&A, and I encourage everyone, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and feel free to type in any questions so that we can make the next hour as interactive and interesting for everyone as possible. So with that, may I turn it over to Cassie, please, to start us off.
Thanks, Barbara. Hi, everyone. I'm Cassie Powers. I'm a senior managing director here at NASEO, and I oversee a number of our programs, and also lead our transportation work and our member engagement. I'll turn it over to Sandy.
Sure. Thanks, Cassie. Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy Fazli, a managing director alongside Kirsten and Cassie at NASEO. I oversee a few different program areas, mainly focused on helping states understand the role of clean energy and energy policy and economic development. So working in workforce development and jobs analyses, community solar, low-income energy and efficiency issues, and equity. I'll pass it over to Kirsten.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm Kirsten Verklaas, also managing director at NASEO with Sandy and Cassie, and I oversee our electricity program and our energy security program. With that, I'll turn it over to Cassie to give an introduction to NASEO.
Thanks, Kirsten. So I'm pleased to be joining everyone today. We're going to talk a little bit about just NASEO as an organization, and then I'll go a little bit into some of the transportation work and some of the great work that the states are doing before turning it over to my colleagues. But as NASEO, we are the member organization for the 56 governor designated energy offices from the states and the territories in the District of Columbia. And we serve as a convener of the states, a liaison between the states and the federal government, and also support the states through research and analysis. And so our liaison role has been a particularly important one in the last year or so, as the Infrastructure Act has been working its way through and is now gearing up for implementation phase. And so we try to elevate the priorities, concerns, and needs of the energy offices to Congress, as well as to the U.S. Department of Energy and their sister agencies in the federal government. So a lot of conversation right now to make sure that the needs of the energy offices are being amplified with the feds. In the role of convener, we offer a number of conferences and events, one of which is coming up next week in DC, NASEO's Energy Policy Outlook Conference from February 8th to the 11th. If you're in the DC area, please join. We're going to be focusing a lot on, again, Infrastructure Act implementation and the needs of the states. But we host another annual event each year in the fall at a rotating location across the country for the energy offices, as well as our affiliate members and other partners in the private sector and federal government. And then we also have a research and an analytical role. The state energy offices really lead policy and program development in their state in the energy sector. And that touches on everything from energy security to clean transportation, energy financing, buildings efficiency, really anything in the energy space. And so NASEO has built a committee structure to support the states as they are developing those energy policies and programs. Our committees are led by state energy offices, typically a couple of co-chairs, and then are, of course, populated by our states as well as affiliate members. And we as NASEO staff serve them by making sure that they have the latest information on what's coming out from Congress, what's coming out from the Department of Energy, as well as just latest developments in the field with presenting them with data and market research and analysis. And so we can go into a little bit of that right now, but I'm happy to kind of talk a little bit more about our transportation work, which I lead. But Sandy and Kirsten, before I do that, is there anything you'd like to add just from NASEO overall?
I think I'll just add that it's a really exciting time to be working with state policymakers and state energy offices. We know that there's been ups and downs in terms of federal commitment and action to clean energy and climate, but we've really seen over the past several years continued investment from the states through the state energy offices and other state partners into clean energy and climate. And we're so thankful to WCEE for highlighting the role that states can play and helping us develop that narrative further.
Great. Well, I'll share a little bit from NASEO's transportation work and some of the exciting work that the states are doing to support clean energy transportation. Alternative fuel vehicle demonstration deployment has long been supported by the energy offices, natural gas, biofuels, propane, electric vehicles, really anything. Part of this is that the state energy offices are their state's lead on energy planning and often look for how transportation fits into the broader energy landscape. And diversifying the fuel source is one of the key priorities of the states to make sure that they have a reliable and robust energy and transportation system. NASEO did a lot of work on this a few years ago through this fun project called IREV, the Initiative for Resilience and Energy Through Vehicles, which we don't talk about too much anymore, but really helped to lay the groundwork for some of the states as they built alternative fuel resiliency and plans into their energy emergency planning and preparedness and their comprehensive energy plans. And again, the idea is that you don't want to be completely reliant on gasoline vehicles. If the supply goes down, you're stuck. And so having a diverse fleet with natural gas vehicles, particularly if you're on the East Coast, electric vehicles, propane, all have certain benefits and applications. And so states are beginning to really look at that. One of the states I wanted to highlight there was the Florida State Energy Office. Kelly Smith Burke is the current director of the Energy Office there and is also the chair of our board of directors here at NASEO. And under her leadership, there's been some really exciting work from the Energy Office overall, but in the transportation space, they created an alternative fuels resiliency plan. And the purpose of this is really to identify how Florida can increase resiliency through diversifying and maximizing its existing alternative transportation fuels, and then identifying new ways for the alternative fuels to be used in a disaster. And of course, as we all know, Florida is battered by hurricanes every year. And so making sure that they had a diverse fuel source in the transportation sector was important. Kelly's office in particular was focused on making sure that there were electric vehicle charging stations along emergency evacuation routes. And so you may all remember from a few years ago, there was some bad press around some Tesla owners that got stranded when they were trying to get out during a hurricane. They couldn't find a place to charge. Of course, Elon Musk had a solution. He uploaded a software update overnight and all the cars got extended range. So that was solved. But if you didn't have a Tesla, it wasn't quite that easy. And so the state thought, well, this is a good opportunity for us to make sure that these drivers, of which there are going to be more and more, have the infrastructure that they need to get out in a safe way. And so some exciting work coming from Florida on the alternative fuels and transportation space. Recently, there's been a really heavy emphasis on transportation electrification in the states, and in particular, electric vehicle charging. Energy offices, again, have long led their state's EV infrastructure programs. Under ARA, they helped to kind of kick off EV infrastructure placement a decade ago. And then when the Volkswagen settlement came through, that $2.9 billion that went to states to invest in alternative fuel projects, the energy offices were usually responsible for investing in EV charging infrastructure. And that helped to create really the first backbone of publicly funded EV infrastructure across the United States. Now states are continuing to invest in this. And of course, there's a huge opportunity now through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, $5 billion running through the state's departments of transportation to invest in an EV charging network. And state energy offices are currently working with their DOTs to elevate the work that's been done and help with the planning process to ensure that this money is invested in an efficient and equitable manner and built off of previous efforts. A lot of emphasis is also on medium and heavy duty electrification. And so we're helping to facilitate some conversations with the states as well as their counterparts at Department of Energy and the private sector there. One thing I'll also just highlight before I close out is that there are a number of regional collaborations popping up, but I know that when we get into the discussion, we'll talk more about some of this regional partnerships and collaboration, but just about the whole country belongs to some sort of a regional electric vehicle working group right now. Rev West is one example. In the Intermountain West, 8 states, their governor signed a memorandum of understanding 4 or 5 years ago now. Those states have been working to make sure that there's EV infrastructure along key corridors and that drivers in the region can get from state to state in an efficient and way. There's also collaboration in the Southeast that had popped up recently, the Southeast Regional Electric Vehicle Information Exchange. And this is really a mechanism for state energy offices to share information, and they've recently engaged their counterparts. The Tennessee Energy Office really was the brains behind this entire initiative. They came up with the idea of wanting to make sure that states were coordinating. The Southeast states have a long history of coordination anyway with emergency planning. wanted to take that a step further into transportation. And the Tennessee Energy Office, led by Molly Cripps, who's also on the NASEO board, really has done an outstanding job with supporting transportation electrification in their state. The Energy Office, again, under Molly's lead, is the administrator for the Volkswagen settlement in that state. And so they are overseeing all of those funds. They are also housing one of the Clean Cities coalitions and are instrumental in a lead in Drive Electric Tennessee. They had some exciting announcements probably 6 or 8 months ago now about a DC fast charging network the Energy Office helped to broker between the Tennessee Valley Authority and some of the partners and the Department of Transportation in the state, as well as the Energy Office. And so really exciting work going on in Tennessee. And again, they're taking really the lead in making sure that states in the Southeast are working with one another. So I've taken too much time, happy to get into more of this. But let me turn it over to Sandy to talk a little bit about some of her work in NASEO.
Sure, thanks, Cassie. No, that was great. And I will just say, in addition to transportation, which Cassie leads, and electricity, which Kirsten leads, NASEO has program areas covering buildings, financing, equity, renewables. And I think one of the really interesting things about the way that NASEO works and about the way that many state energy offices work is promoting an examination of how those different areas intersect. We're getting more and more immersed in conversations about vehicle to grid interaction or buildings to grid interaction, and how this energy transition will continue to impact our energy systems moving forward. So, we're appreciative, I think, of all the state energy offices that are doing work in that space, and then helping to inform NASEO and helping to inform the federal government about what's going on at the state level, kind of as incubators of all these different interdependencies. But my work specifically focuses on a few different areas. I lead some of NASEO's international work, which has mainly focused on connecting with state energy officials in the country of India so that they can learn about how NASEO works and sort of develop best practices and information sharing, similar to the way that the state energy offices here in the US have been impactful. I also lead an effort around workforce development and jobs here at NASEO. The history of that is, as some of you may know, during the previous administration, the US Department of Energy opted to stop producing one of the seminal analyses that really helps inform our understanding of the energy workforce, which is called the US Energy and Employment Report. So once we learned of that shift, NASEO partnered with our partners at the Energy Futures Initiative, which is led by Secretary Moniz, who served under President Obama, to develop this report. And one of the very consistent, or some of the very consistent trends that we got out of that data year after year of surveying energy employers and trying to gain an understanding of the demographic and skills composition of the energy workforce was, one, a very deep underrepresentation of women and minorities in the energy workforce, particularly as you go higher up the rungs of corporate hierarchy and decision-making. And two, consistent difficulty with that reported by energy employers in hiring for these energy jobs. And so it seemed to be a natural fit to start to think about, how do we not only expand the pipeline of talent going into the energy workforce, but also diversify it and get more and diverse perspectives into the energy workforce. So we've, over the past couple of years, we've had a partnership with a group called the Historically Black Colleges and Universities Community Development Action Coalition, which works with HBCUs and other minority serving institutions to really promote community development strategies, one of which is around clean energy. So we've had the opportunity to connect directly with faculty and staff and students of HBCUs and other minority serving institutions to understand about the degree programs that they offer in clean energy and sustainable transportation, and connect those institutions with state energy offices, really with the hope of helping to inform how states develop their policies and programs, and diversifying the workforce over time. So that's one project that I'm particularly proud of that's been ongoing. Right now, this partnership is looking at the infrastructure bill and trying to pull out some provisions that might help poise the state energy offices and minority serving institutions to partner with one another, whether on research and development or with minority serving institutions serving as hubs for training and workforce development opportunities, especially in underserved communities. So that's been ongoing. And then the other project that I'll highlight is actually completely different work from workforce diversity, but it's focused on the low and moderate income community solar space, where we're seeing a lot of state energy offices develop very ambitious commitments for renewable energy deployment, as well as around equity. And community solar is being relied on as one of the strategies that can help expand access for lower and moderate income households to access solar generation, especially if they're living in multifamily or master metered buildings where they wouldn't necessarily have rooftop space to accommodate solar. And so we've started a new project called the Inclusive Shared Solar Initiative, which brings together the state energy offices and their counterparts within the low income home energy assistance program, LIHEAP program, those agencies, to really figure out whether there are ways to bring more LIHEAP eligible customers into community solar projects and programs. And one of the states that's involved in ISSI, the Inclusive Shared Solar Initiative, is the state of Minnesota. They are led by a really strong State Energy Office Director, Michelle Grancy, and the ISSI team in Minnesota is led by another strong woman, Kelly Rose, who's been doing fantastic work identifying opportunities for community solar expansion in the state. And as a Minnesotan, they make me very proud to live here. So I did, in the spirit of showcasing strong female leadership, want to do a special shout out to them. And I'm happy to touch on more aspects of ISSI or the workforce development work as we go on in the project or in the session. Kirsten, over to you.
Great, thank you, Sandy and Cassie. And I think one of the things that's always fun working at NASEO is hearing about all these great programs that are happening in the states and allowing the states to do peer exchange and provide them with the opportunity to learn from each other and us to learn from them too. So that's been one of the kind of really exciting things at NASEO. So I oversee the electricity program and the energy security program, and I'll speak more about the electricity program because that's sort of more my wheelhouse. But the energy security program, for you, those of you who don't know, the state energy offices in a lot of states, alongside with the public utility commissions, are responsible to assist the energy emergency management agencies in the response to an energy emergency. So like Cassie mentioned, if there's a hurricane bearing down, there's a cyber attack, or there is some other kind of man-made or natural hazard that's happening, our members provide the energy expertise to the energy emergency management agencies, and they're also responsible to support kind of the planning for these incidents. And a lot of times are called upon by the governor to support the expertise and resilience planning overall for the state, or very specifically state energy security plans that all the states and the District of Columbia and the territories have. So if there's we support our members in the planning and resilience kind of phase, and how can we plan for these emergencies, and also what can we learn from the emergencies. We provide them with support when they do exercises to prepare for some of these emergencies, as well as provide guidelines for some of these plans that I mentioned. And in that, it's really interesting what, I want to support what Sandy said. A lot of these programs that we have at NASEO kind of touch each other. Energy security touches electricity touches buildings, touches transportation. It's sort of becoming one big program, and so we're always looking for these connections. And in the kind of resilience and energy security space and electricity space, I want to highlight one program that has been really interesting in Kentucky. Kenya Stump there leads the State Energy Office, and she's really great at providing kind of a model for how data can be used to provide insights. Their model in Kentucky is focused a little bit on energy security, but it's broader than that. They have a really great dashboard where they showcase what's happening right at that time in Kentucky, but they also did a great project on kind of microgrids, and where they did a really good study on where microgrids in Kentucky might provide the best benefits for resilience. A lot of our members are interested in microgrids. We have a microgrid state working group together with NARUC, but a lot of times it's sort of a one-off maybe, and there's a proposal from a utility or from a developer for a microgrid, but this study in Kentucky really looks at where can we best place these microgrids to benefit the communities around them, and where in the states do they provide the most benefit in terms of resilience to the states and the communities. And then on the electricity side, we provide, like Cassie said, technical assistance and support on kind of a wide area of things electricity related. But I think right now there's certainly a focus on the Investment and Infrastructure Act and what that means for the state energy offices. There's a lot of provisions on resilience in the electricity sector, but there's also a lot of provisions on thinking about transmission planning and distribution planning, and kind of how can we modernize the grids with the resilience in mind, but I also think with clean energy goals in mind, with cost effectiveness in mind. And so a lot of discussions in the electricity committee have centered around the role of renewable energy, what kind of new technologies are out there. Hydrogen is of great interest to the states. CCUS, how do we make sure that we transition each state in their own way, in their own capacity, but how do we transition the energy sector to a more cleaner environment and less carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions, and then also like what's the role of distributed energy resources versus transmission, what is the role of offshore wind and other technologies that are popping up, and then also what is sort of the implications of electrification for the grid as we're thinking about transportation, the building sector electrifying. What does it mean? How can we make sure that the grid is ready for all these new demands, and how can we make sure that the grid is also green as we're trying to use this as a decarbonization tool. And one of the things I want to highlight, one of the other states I wanted to highlight is Oregon. Janine Benner leads the state energy office there, and they just did a fabulous transmission study, and they brought a lot of stakeholders together looking at what are some of the benefits of an RTO, so regional transmission organization, and would that be something that is possible for Oregon? There are a lot of these discussions out west and in some of the other states that are not part of an RTO currently, but I think they did a really great job of bringing all these stakeholders together, voicing all these opinions and the cons and the benefits and what each person and stakeholder thinks about this. And then putting that together in a great report that's available on their website. So I encourage everybody to look at that because I think it's a really fabulous, fabulous thing that they did there. And so those are kind of the things that we support our state energy offices on, and we'll continue to do so through the electricity committee. So with that, I'll turn it over to Barbara.
Great, thank you all so much. That was just fascinating, and it's awesome, the scope and the breadth and the depth of what you're doing at NASEO. Thank you very much. I want to remind all our participants, and thank you for participating, but we would love to hear from you. Please do feel free to type in your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. As I mentioned at the outset, this is intended to be your session and as interactive as possible, and I'm sure all of these wonderful representatives from NASEO would love to hear from you, as would I. So I will start with a few questions and look forward to seeing the others popping into the Q&A. So I'm just, as I said, I'm just amazed at all that you're covering at NASEO, and you have a total staff of about 13 people. You've got 56 different states and territories, and now there's an international dimension, and all moving in way beyond the traditional energy sphere into transportation and buildings and workforce development and community development. And of course, I'm sure dealing with so many other stakeholders as well who participate in your programs and with whom you interact. So for each of you, can you answer, how do you utilize your resources most effectively to have the kind of incredible impact that you do?
I can start. Well, first of all, we are lucky to have a really great team at NASEO. As you said, we have a staff of about 13 right now, and they're all just rock stars. I mean, they just hit the nail on the head every time. And so it makes our jobs easy. We are, as I mentioned, really organized under a committee structure. And so we rely heavily on the states to identify what the priorities are. And so we rely on the co-chairs of our committees, as well as the state energy offices participants and the affiliates, to flag what they're working on, what they're concerned about, what their state's energy goals are going to be for the year, et cetera. And we kind of crosswalk that with what we're hearing on the Hill and from the Department of Energy, and then have to pick and choose. But it helps us to really, each of our program areas, choose, 2 or 3 of the priorities for the year, and go from there. But we do spend a lot of time also talking across our program areas. One of the blessings of being a small staff is that we're used to be constantly popping into offices, now constantly chatting via the chat to share some information. So.
And I'll just add, I think that's exactly right. I'll just add, we do have a lot of flexibility to partner with other organizations. I mentioned the HBCU group, but almost every single project benefits from a partnership with either an expert in the field or a partner association or organization that has inroads into new communities and stakeholder groups that we wouldn't otherwise have access to. And so that's been a real blessing as well. And I think one of the benefits of having a small and agile organization. And then the final piece that I'll mention too is, in addition to our membership of state energy offices, NASEO has an affiliates program that brings together businesses, nonprofits, research institutions that are interested in state energy policy. And we really use them quite a bit as an extension of our staff in a way. We tap into affiliates' expertise and resources quite a bit. Cassie mentioned our Energy Policy Outlook Conference next week, and we have about a dozen affiliate members who are speaking and sharing their expertise as part of that agenda. And just looking at the crowd that we have here, I see Lloyd Cass from Franklin Energy is in the audience, and he's been a terrific source of expertise on energy efficiency and financing and grid interactive efficient buildings for his part. So we're really appreciative of that aspect of NASEO as well.
One thing I'll also just add that I realized I should have kicked off with at the very beginning is that NASEO is governed by a board of directors, about 18 state energy offices, our executive committee, and then 2 representatives from each of NASEO's 6 regions. And they are the ones who, I mean, this is an active board. This is not a meet once a year for a couple hours. We rely on them heavily to weigh in on what their priorities are and really make sure that we are on point.
Great, thank you very much. That's very helpful. We do have questions coming in. So let me read the first one that's in chat. What are the efforts that NASEO and the states are doing regarding transmission challenges? Building a transmission line for any sort of energy source has become more difficult, and securing community buy-in along the way may seem elusive. Kristen, would that be in your area?
Yes, and that's a great question. Thank you for the question. I really appreciate it. And yes, it's very true that, securing kind of the stakeholder engagement and the community buy-in to some of these transmission lines has been a challenge. So there are wide varieties of ways that NASEO works with the state energy offices and the states on some of these issues. One, I would say it's important to understand kind of what technological enhancements there are for existing transmission lines. We're actually going to have a great panel on this at the NASEO Energy Policy Outlook Conference next week that Cassie mentioned. But before we're thinking of, we need to build more transmission, which is certainly true, I think it's important to understand that we need to use the existing transmission really effective and really wisely, so that we can, when there's the need to build new transmission, go to the stakeholder communities, go to the local communities and say, we've exhausted all the other opportunities and all the other things that we could do prior to thinking about transmission lines. So I think that is one way, and we're trying to be very informative to the state energy offices about this. We will actually later this year have a publication in addition to the Outlook panel next week on exactly this. What are some of the innovative ways to think about transmission enhancements, and what are some of the technologies are out there, reconductoring, use of data, etc. And then I think additionally, we support the state energy offices in understanding kind of as they're thinking about their clean energy goals, decarbonization goals, their resilience goals, where does the transmission line make the most sense? Where is it the most appropriate? And thinking about that in kind of a regional context as well. And then understanding what sort of the benefits are and supporting states and analyzing what are some of the benefits that each state can, retain from the transmission line. Because I think a lot of times when we're thinking about transmission lines, we're thinking about it in a regional context, and we're thinking about it, how does it benefit the region or the state? But the decision is actually done on the local level, on the state level. I'm sure you all know the main line in the fall that got not approved by the main voters. And while this line is really helpful for the region, it's important to show what is actually the benefit for some of these transmission projects within each state. And so we're supporting states to think through that and kind of support them with analysis or make connections to national labs that can provide this analysis. So there are multiple ways, but it's certainly not an easy task, and it will be an ongoing task, not just in NASEO and the states, but also in coordination with DOE and other federal agencies.
I'll just add, beyond the transmission issue, NASEO has been working with a lot of state energy offices to highlight innovative ways to go about stakeholder engagement and really rethink how to bring underserved voices into the picture. So last year we released a report on stakeholder engagement strategies, really highlighting a useful tool that we've seen out there called the spectrum from community engagement to ownership. And the states can use that kind of as a framework, as a tool to understand where their stakeholder engagement processes fall. Is it closer to kind of top-down communications and information sharing, or is there a movement towards more community ownership? And of course, that's not an option in every state or in every locality, but I think just having the tool has helped a lot of state energy offices understand how to bring in questions of community buy-in and reluctance into these infrastructure projects, especially because we are right on the cusp of a lot more infrastructure investment, hopefully, in the coming years. And thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you very much. Great answers, and certainly an excellent question in light of all that's going on these days. Good to know more about your stakeholder engagement process too. That's helpful because, of course, we need that on so many levels. So please, again, feel free to put your questions into the chat and Q&A, and I will continue here for now. So I would like to see what are the biggest opportunities and challenges facing state energy offices in 2022. And I'm sure it must vary dramatically around the country, but if you each perhaps in your own sphere could talk about what you see are the opportunities and challenges that are looming ahead here this year.
Sure, I can get us started. I mean, I think the resounding theme for probably all of us is going to be Infrastructure Act. Obviously, there's a lot of money coming through. There's going to be $500 million going to the state energy offices through the state energy program. Another couple $100 million going through the energy offices for the energy efficiency conservation block grant program, as well as another couple $100 million for a revolving loan fund that can be used for energy efficiency retrofits. And so lots of opportunities, and those are going through the formula funds to the energy offices, not to mention the many dollars that are going to be available for competitive opportunities. And I know in the transportation space, there's going to be $5 billion for electric vehicle infrastructure deployment going through state departments of transportation. We're working right now with AASHTO, as well as the newly created Joint Office of Energy and Transportation and DOE and DOT to try to figure out how states can work with each other, as well as the federal agencies, to really make sure that that money is additive and can be spent efficiently and equitably. There's another $2.5 billion competitive opportunity for charging and fueling infrastructure through that, through the Department of Transportation under the Infrastructure Act. Another $5 billion for clean school buses through EPA. It's just money everywhere for clean transportation, which is exciting. And I saw just a question coming through the Q&A about some examples of what state initiatives are doing to bolster decarbonization. There are many. I know in the EV space, states are trying to align to make sure that their corridor charging network is built out, then also to make sure that community charging hubs are being built appropriately. I think, as many know, most charging happens at home or at the workplace. And so you need the stations along the highway because you need them. People need to feel comfortable going to grandma's house, but most of the driving takes place nearby. So states are trying to prioritize that. We know the states in the West are already planning or starting some planning activities around how to coordinate some infrastructure asks. And Barbara, just to your question too about priorities, we administer a member survey once every 1 to 2 years. And in our recent member survey, the top 4 programmatic priorities for the states were electric vehicles, low and moderate income issues, equity issues, and then resilience. And so I think that we'll probably see a lot of the SEP dollars, as well as the additional Infrastructure Act dollars being leveraged to help states accomplish their goals under those 4 areas.
Great, thank you. Sandy and Kirsten, you want to respond to the opportunities and challenges, and also if you can see the question in the Q&A box, feel free to augment your answers with that.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges I think that will just be for the states, in addition to what Cassie has said, is figuring out and understanding where kind of how they can support initiatives that hit decarbonization efforts, as well as resilience benefits, as well as cost effectiveness. So looking at, infrastructure investment under those 3 aspects that, hopefully a smart investment will allow to reduce customer costs, will reduce emissions, but also enhance the resilience of the grid and the state. And in addition, also provide benefits for, disadvantaged communities, and also workforce and economic benefits. The state energy offices, being close to the governor, always have that in mind, that economic aspect of supporting the energy infrastructure in the state being an economic driver as well, and being a workforce driver as well. And so I think kind of figuring out how to make these investments that hit on all these aspects, and where the states fall. Not everybody will fall, equally on all these 3 sides. Some might prioritize one over the other, but I think they all states have those 3 kind of aspects in mind. And so making sure that investments that they're supporting hits on all those 3 issues.
Thank you.
I think I'll just add, I think that's exactly right. The infrastructure bill is kind of the 500-pound gorilla in the room. But at the same time, states are also trying to navigate their own legislative and regulatory landscapes. Many states are ahead of the federal government in their goals and trying to green their grid, trying to decarbonize buildings in their transportation sector, really looking at innovative ways to electrify, which, in many states, it's not a clear-cut, there's not a clear-cut technology answer quite yet, especially in the colder states. So I think that's where many of the state energy offices are trying to navigate those 2 levels of decision-making and governance. The other piece of this too is there's the infrastructure bill, and it's a lot of money, but it's not nearly enough compared to the amount of investment that's needed to achieve both national and state level climate and clean energy goals. So a lot of the states are in the position of thinking about how to best integrate the different types of investment opportunities that there are. One example, for instance, one of the buildings provisions in the infrastructure bill is energy efficiency and indoor air quality improvements in schools. We've also seen a lot of state energy offices take advantage of the American Rescue Plan Act funds for schools, as well as state appropriations, ratepayer funds. So I think, one of the challenges before the state energy offices, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this plays out, is how they navigate those different opportunities to create greater impact. And I think, Cassie had mentioned the Volkswagen settlement earlier. That's an ongoing source of investment for electric vehicles at the state level. And there is also new money coming through state departments of transportation and the infrastructure bill, and a lot of interest at the local level. So really navigating, I think, this complex maze of the infrastructure bill plus all the existing opportunities and challenges is going to be the new kind of dominant theme for the coming year.
Good, thank you. And Cassie, you mentioned the poll and the 4 outcomes. We have a questioner in the chat who wonders if you could please repeat what those 4 areas are again.
Sure, yeah. And so these are kind of the top 4 programmatic areas according to a national survey that we administered to state energy offices. So this is not the top for every energy office, but kind of equalized across the states. And they are electric vehicles, low and moderate income programs, equity, and resilience.
Thank you. Thanks for putting it into the chat as well as responding to that. So We are, as you all know, engaged in an energy transition right now, and at a very important time, and with a tipping point that I think is accelerating. I'm sure it varies in terms of the geographic regions around the country, but how does that transformation vary by state, and how do you see that playing out within your community at NASEO?
Yeah, Barbara, I think your question is exactly right, that there is quite a bit of variation in the approaches. But if you do zoom out and take a step back and look at the goals, there is some interesting commonalities, regardless of whether you're in Mississippi or Maine, right? There is an interest in resilience, in creating more durability and better performance of energy systems, whether the electric grid or fuel delivery systems. There's definite interest in serving underserved communities like rural and disadvantaged communities. And so the specific pathways to achieve that, I think, can look different from state to state. It's often the rationale that's used, right? Is it an economic development lens, or is it a climate change lens? Is it all of the above? So I think one of the really interesting things about the state energy offices is that they're attuned to what their governor's priorities are, as well as what their businesses and citizens are looking for, and can help navigate that and design programs and policies in a really interesting way. And I mentioned Mississippi in passing before, but they have a really interesting inclusive innovation program that works with historically Black colleges and universities in the state, is geared towards rural and remote communities, and is designed to promote more entrepreneurship in clean energy technology for the agricultural sector. And I think, Mississippi is often a state that doesn't come up in clean energy and climate conversations, but the ultimate pathway that we see them moving towards is not all that dissimilar from where you might see some of the more usual suspects. And of course, we see the state energy offices also navigating this along different lines, like urban versus rural. The solutions look very different in those different contexts. So I'll leave it at that, but I think it's been a really interesting transition. And Kirsten, Cassie, feel free to add anything from your perspective.
No, I think that's exactly right, Sandy, and I would just second that. And I think it also looks different depending on the resources in each state, right? If you are a wind-rich or offshore wind coastal community versus a landlocked, maybe a very sunny solar state, you will obviously prioritize different technologies, and not just the resources, but also what your economy looks like currently. And out west, we have the Western Green Hydrogen Initiative, which has 11 states out west and 2 of the Canadian provinces looking at what role clean hydrogen can play going forward. And there's just a very strong interest by our members to look at the infrastructure that they currently have, which is oil and natural gas dominated, and how can you adapt that? How can you use the infrastructure? How can you use the workforce for some of these new technologies like clean hydrogen? And I know in the question there was also, or in the chat box, there was a question on CCS, and I think there's a strong interest by the state energy offices on carbon capture technologies and utilization technologies. There was just an announcement, this was done with the support of the state energy office in Louisiana on a direct air capture investment that's happening that will create a lot of new jobs in the states. And so I think each state is looking at kind of the new technologies through its own lens, and will place an emphasis on different technologies. But like Sandy said, I think they all have they're all moving kind of in the same direction, just might be slightly different approaches that they take.
Thank you. Cassie, anything to add at this point?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that, the regional approach at NASEO is something that we really value. As I kind of alluded to earlier, we've divided the country into 6 different regions, and we convene these groups regularly. And, beyond the energy transition, states have leveraged these regional collaborations to push along areas in, transportation electrification, in transmission planning, in energy efficiency policy development. And so making sure that states can talk to one another, either on a regional basis or a multi-state basis, is one of the core tenets of NASEO. And it really allows them, particularly in the context of the Infrastructure Act and incoming federal opportunities, to leverage existing dollars with new and additional funding to help achieve their goals.
Thank you. Very, very good. And again, once more to everybody who's listening in, do feel free to add questions. We really appreciate those of you who have reached out with the questions you've provided, but more are always welcome. So again, using the Q&A button, or feel free to use the chat to distribute your questions, and we'll look forward to engaging with our leaders from NASEO on the points you'd like to hear about. I'm going to shift to another prepared question, which is, of course, we've been talking about NASEO, which is obviously appropriate here today, and you have your meetings next week. But those the following week, those meetings are followed by NARUC, and the State Public Utility Commissioners are meeting, and oftentimes the state consumer advocates are either co-located or meeting very close by when the other groups are meeting. So you all, I gather, work very closely together. Can you talk a little bit about those relationships and what that's like?
Yeah, I can start there. We certainly very closely work together with NARUC. We have, I mentioned the microgrid state working group. We have a grid interactive building working group that we're doing together with NARUC. We over the last 2 years, culminating, it's actually already a year ago. It feels like yesterday, but it was a year ago. We had the Comprehensive Electricity Planning Task Force, which brought together 15 state energy offices and public utility commissions to look at how can you align transmission, distribution, and generation planning a little bit better as some of these areas converge. The planning that usually happens very siloed also kind of needs to converge in order to make sure that we're meeting the state energy policy goals of each state. And we have a number of other initiatives that we're working on. We're in the process of launching a new initiative on DER integration and cost assessment, kind of in light of the FERC Order 2222. So that will kind of roll out over the spring. And we continue to work really closely with NARUC. We also work very closely with NCSL, the National Council on State Legislators, and NGA, the National Governors Association, as well as NEMA, the National Association of Energy Emergency Management Agencies, on a variety of different topics. And I think it's really great to provide this platform for our members and the members of the other N groups, as we call them, to kind of take their relationships a step further and out of their states, right? A lot of them collaborate amazingly on the state level, but it's always great to bring it kind of to the national level and give them a platform where they can learn from each other and foster kind of these conversations outside of the state environment, and really focused on one or two issues. So we really appreciate all the N groups and really appreciate working with them. It's been really great collaboration.
I'll just add to that too, that, as Kirsten had mentioned, we've been working closely with NARUC and also in the past worked with NAC and other N groups. NGA has long been a partner. We're also working more and more with AASHTO, which I guess we'll have to start referring to it as the NA groups or something like that moving forward. But we're kind of excited to, as our energy office members start to expand their partnerships and working with new agencies and new stakeholders, we too are diversifying those that we interact with here in DC to serve them.
Great, thank you. Well, it's inspiring to hear about all the collaboration that's occurring across all those different communities. My next question involves the fact that for those of us in Washington, we see a lot of divisiveness during these times and in the federal arena and elsewhere. Are you observing that same phenomenon out in the states? And if so, how do you overcome that?
I think that, one of the advantages of NASEO and something that we often hear from our state members is that it's a very collaborative environment. We, as the member organization for the 50 states and the 5 territories and the District of Columbia, obviously represent a wide diversity of viewpoints, politics, et cetera. But the Energy Office has managed to find common ground, exchange best practices, et cetera. We are also seeing more focused attention on building formal relationships with other state agencies and other energy stakeholders within states. There was an executive order issued, or the executive director, issued by the governor of Michigan a few weeks ago now, basically anticipating the Infrastructure Act dollars that are coming through and directing her agencies to work with one another. This was specific to transportation, but could obviously be applied across across a number of different issue areas. And so it was really a formal way to solidify partnerships. I imagine we'll be seeing more of that. There are obviously a number of advisory groups, stakeholder groups. So the energy offices, I think, continue to collaborate with their sister agencies, but then are also working to really broaden their stakeholder engagement mechanisms. I think people worried at the beginning of the pandemic that there would be less engagement with stakeholders in a state, but in some instances, the states have seen that that's actually been the opposite. Providing a virtual opportunity to speak with their agency has actually broadened participation and given a platform to those who otherwise couldn't, make time or couldn't attend an in-person meeting at 6 o'clock at night. And so, there are kind of a number of ways that states are beginning to broaden their engagement.
Thank you. Kirsten, Sandy, you want to add to that?
I'll just add, we definitely have the privilege of the state energy office vantage point, which tends within a given state to be very, again, collegial and collaborative, as opposed to a regulatory or legislative position, which can sometimes escalate into, legal battles or more political arguments. One example that I found really interesting a few years ago was in Utah. There was the Public Utilities Commission was right on the cusp of starting a proceeding around a net metering bill that was causing a lot of angst, and there was a lot of divisiveness around it. The state energy office under the previous governor and the previous energy office director essentially held a series of stakeholder engagement meetings to not necessarily with the goal of resolving it, but with the goal of bringing together these different perspectives to see if there was a path forward without having to escalate it into a regulatory proceeding that could be very drawn out and not very constructive. And they did actually end up putting forth a resolution on behalf of solar developers and utilities and a lot of strange bedfellows that was ultimately sort of approved by the Public Utilities Commission without that drawn out process. So I think that's just an example of how a more collegial approach in the right setting can actually help avoid some of the divisiveness, or at least confront it in a way that is constructive as opposed to detrimental to the energy landscape.
Good, thank you. Great example. Kirsten, anything you'd like to add at this point? Okay. Good. So that's been very helpful. I'm going to do one more call to our audience. This is your chance to ask the leadership at NASEO any questions regarding energy issues, transportation, state relations, and it looks like that just solicited a question. So, or a comment, I should say, about the U.S. Energy and Employment Report. Anything you'd like to add to that, Sandy, at this point? Looks like there's some interest in that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So actually the 2018, 2019, and 2020 U.S. Energy and Employment Reports were produced outside of DOE by NASEO Energy Futures Initiative and BW Research Partnership using the exact same methodology that was approved by the federal government and used at DOE. So that was our attempt to create some continuity for the report and also be able to highlight some of the year-on-year trends that we've seen during a very fluctuating energy market time period. So I'll drop the link into the chat for the 2018 through 2020 reports. And I'm really happy to say we helped transition the report back to DOE in 2021 this year. BW Research Partnership, which has been part of the process since 2015 when the report was originally started, is still part of this process and has been making sure that the survey methodology and analysis remains consistent and valuable for states and other policymakers. So thanks for your comment, Lori.
Good, thank you. Thanks very much. I'm going to shift gears here slightly and talk about the fact that you all have very different professional backgrounds. Your prior experience before NASEO is quite distinct from each other. Can you tell us, please, if that evolution of your career and your winding up at NASEO was part of a long time plan that evolved, or was it serendipity, or was it a combination of both? And would be interested in hearing, I think all of us, as to your very successful careers and how you arrived where you are today.
Yeah, I can get us started. So I actually started my career not in energy at all, but in international relations. And I worked for a very small think tank that was affiliated with Johns Hopkins University on German-American relations. And I realized that I actually wasn't so interested in security after all and international relations per se. I was mostly interested in energy and climate. So I went back to school and got my master's in energy policy and climate at Johns Hopkins. And then I actually went to work at NASEO, which was sort of bridging this international part because I worked in the international program at NASEO and that energy part. And then had the opportunity to work as a fellow at DOE for a few years. And there worked a lot with states and local entities, which then led me to NASEO to continue that work with the states. And so it's been really great to kind of start out internationally and then come back to the US domestically, because one of the reasons I went to DOE was that I realized I knew a lot about the energy sector in Tanzania and not so much about Tennessee. So I wanted to kind of know both. And, I think there'll always be my love for international parts just because I grew up in Europe. And so there's always that kind of personal interest. But I think the red thread throughout my career has been sort of this energy policy and climate part, regardless if that is in the international area where I think it's important, but also obviously I'm looking at the states and kind of the relationships between states in the US. And so I would say it's probably a mixture of serendipity and planning, maybe more serendipity than planning. I don't know. If you'd ask me where I am in 5 years, I have no idea. I'm not a person who plans that out. But I do think, if anybody in the audience has questions about career changes and moving a little bit and moving from, maybe something that slightly different to something else, I'm happy to chat offline, because that was certainly a challenge, but I managed to make it work. And I think actually I appreciate that about my career so far and about others, that bringing different perspectives from different areas is actually always really helpful. And, thinking outside of the box and bringing things from Tanzania into the US conversation sometimes also is really interesting. So I think, yeah, that's sort of been my trajectory. And again, if anybody wants to connect about career changes, let me know.
Thank you. Great story, Kirsten. I know Sandy's working feverishly here in the Q&A. Cassie, do you want to talk a little bit about your career trajectory?
Sure. My background is actually in urban and environmental planning. I went to get my grad degree in that and wanted to work for a local government, but my now husband got a job up in DC after grad school. So it really limited my geographic scope, and it was 2011 and there were no jobs. And so, I said, well, back in DC, I guess we'll have to look beyond and look at the policy realm. And Georgetown Climate Center was hiring for an EV program coordinator. And I didn't know much about EVs, but it was kind of transportation related. And so I figured, well, I guess that's kind of like urban planning. So I'll apply, and was there for 4 years and then transitioned to NASEO to lead their transportation work. And that's how I got here. But I've been lucky. I've been working with states on transportation and energy policy now for about 10 years. And it's been a really helpful experience.
Great. And it sounds like you love it. So that's important too. Sandy, do you have a moment here to tell us your story?
I do. I just realized I was typing my answers to Lori in the wrong spot in the chat, so I apologize.
That's fine.
So yeah, my background, actually, I'm an immigrant to the United States from the Middle East, and just there was a lot of displacement and political turmoil in my family's home country because of Western dependence on fossil fuels. So I first started approaching careers in immigration and foreign affairs, but then sort of switched through serendipity to a job at the Alliance to Save Energy. And from there, just kind of drank the Kool-Aid in energy efficiency and clean energy, and ultimately got an internship at the Colorado Energy Office while I was pursuing grad work, and then got sort of swept in by NASEO and drank another set of Kool-Aid on the state energy front. So it's been a good career that has allowed me to work alongside really wonderful people like Cassie and Kirsten.
Great, thank you, Sandy. Thank you, everybody. And This has been just a tremendous session. Thank you all for listening in and participating, and for all the thoughtful questions that were placed in chat and Q&A. I'd really like to thank Kirsten and Sandy and Cassie for joining us today and so thoughtfully talking about the work at NASEO and the incredible progress that's being made. It's inspiring to hear all of you discussing that. I'd like to also thank Robin Robinson, who makes these sessions possible and is our wizard behind the screen. So thank you, Robin. And with that, we look forward to welcoming you to future WCEE events in 2022. And thank you, everyone, again, for your support. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Barbara. Take care.
Thank you.